This is Paul Johnson with The Optimistic American. Today we're going to talk about a very famous battle in American history called the Battle of Hamburger Hill, which is oftentimes misunderstood. Our guest today is Rocky Olson, who wrote a book called Sergeant Rock, The Last Warrior Standing. Now, Sergeant Rock, who I have fallen in love with, he was in the military. He literally was in the 101st Airborne, which at that point in time basically meant he was infantry. And he was in the 1st Division to drive up the mountain on Hamburger Hill. He has some harrowing stories of himself and the losses of his brothers in Vietnam, advice for those people who came back home and had PTSD. He also has some advice for Americans today as we're looking at what's going on in foreign conflicts with Russia and China, and what we're seeing with Iran and Israel today with Hamas doing the brutal attack that they had done. I think you'll enjoy this. It's a great show. It definitely is one that got me emotional. Thanks for joining us today. And I always recommend, if you like what we're doing, push that subscribe button. It really does help us keep our mission moving. Now on with Sergeant Rock and The Last Warrior Standing. Rocky, I am so happy to have you on our show here at The Optimistic American. I know that you've written a book that is a really fun book. I encourage people to read. It's called The Last Warrior Standing, and it really focuses.
Rock, Last Warrior Standing.
It really focuses on the battle that many people know as Hamburger Hill. There are different names for that mountain, obviously, but Hamburger Hill ended up being the name that people took because of so many. Because of how difficult it was to actually take that particular position. But before we get into the battle, and you have some heroic stories and maybe one of the more different looks at the Vietnam War that I've heard in a long time, and I want to get into that. But if you would, for our audience, why don't we just start with a little bit of background on the Vietnam War? If you could talk about who the two different sides were, what side we were on, just the basics. So people, there are a lot of young people who are watching this that just weren't around when the Vietnam War was taking place.
Okay. Should I start off how I got there in the first place?
Sure. I would love to hear your story about how you ended up in the military.
Okay. I was a young man in college. And I was 22 years old, and I decided, I need to do something about this war that's going on. I am a patriot. I love this country. But at the same time, I was a little apprehensive about going over there, and I didn't have any special talents, so I knew that I'd be an infantry soldier, and that was scary. That was 1968. Right at the peak of the Vietnam War. Between 200 and 400 soldiers were dying every week in the country at that time. So it was scary. And when my last semester when the semester I was in was over, I just did not go back to school, and I said, "Come and get me." And Uncle Sam sent me the famous letter. And off to training I went to basic and then infantry training. And then I got my orders saying I was going to be an infantry soldier in Vietnam. I got to come home for 2 weeks and say goodbye to my parents. Anyway, and then I went to Vietnam. I was assigned to the 101st Airborne, which is a famous division that goes clear back to World War II.
I always get a little confused on the 101st. I have a accountant of mine that was in the Airborne also, but are they the straight lacers or the cross lacers on their boots?
As a matter of fact, when I was in Vietnam, they tried one jump. Excuse me. They tried one jump in Vietnam, and it was a fiasco. You can't jump into the jungles very well, and can't jump into the cities. And so they decided well, we're going to use Huey helicopters, and became the symbol of the Vietnam War. And so they changed the 101st Airborne's jump status qualification, and you did not have to have the jump pins. Did not have to go through jump school. We were still airborne because everywhere we went was by air. So we did not have to hike or hump, as we called it, long distances as other soldiers had to do, infantry soldiers. We were picked up by helicopters and taken right to the battle, dumped off and engaged. And sometimes we had to rappel out of the helicopters because we were so involved so much at the time. And so anyway, that's how the difference between the 101st Airborne Division was from World War II to Vietnam. We did not have to be jump qualified. Okay.
All right.
Now I wanted to be able to say yes, I had jump. So after the war was over, I came back home to Utah and joined a jump parachute club and actually jumped. So I can say that yes, I have done it. But in Vietnam, that was not required.
You just had to jump out of the helicopter.
Yeah, we just helicopter got down. When he got within about 10 feet, we started bailing out because the helicopter did not want to hang around very long for obvious reasons. And so there were 8 of us in each helicopter. And as the helicopter entered the drop zone area, we unasked, we call it, very quickly. And we had about 2 seconds to get out before the chopper was going to be on its way again. And so we just had to jump out. And if it happened to be at night and we didn't know where the ground was, that's too bad.
All right. So you end up in the 101st Airborne and you're going to Vietnam.
Yes.
In terms of the background of Vietnam, I know that, it's, we end up in this battle mainly because the French have left it.
Yes.
There's the domino theory going on in the United States. The domino theory was that
Yes.
if it fell in Vietnam, if Vietnam fell, that other communist, that the communists would end up taking over other places. Right. South Vietnam, when we first came in, I believe was run by Diem, and the North Vietnamese were the ones that were the invaders. The North Vietnamese army, I think, was called the People's Army of Vietnam.
Republic of Vietnam.
There we go. And when people hear things like we were also fighting the Viet Cong, I think the Viet Cong was actually on the South Vietnam side, correct?
The Viet Cong were the local South Vietnamese rebels, agitators, whatever. The Russian government was giving North Vietnam money and weapons to fight the war, and much of that money came down to the North Vietnamese soldiers, who were very good. They were very good soldiers. But the ragtag people that were already in Vietnam, the locals who decided they wanted to fight for the communist cause, they were given a little money and a few weapons, and they caused a lot of trouble, mostly set booby traps, but sometimes they engaged us in actual combat. So it wasn't until after the Tet Offensive that we pretty much eliminated all of the Viet Cong. And because of that, North Vietnam started to send down their regulars in massive numbers to continue the war. Obviously, they were trying to take over South Vietnam and turn them into a communist country.
So you were talking about the Tet Offensive and the North Vietnamese troops. Once we pretty much eliminated the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese troops began to try to move southwards. And my understanding, there's been a lot of controversy around the idea of whether or not Hamburger Hill was actually necessary to take. But from a military standpoint, it was a peak mountain, as I understand, that was looking over the area where most of the People's Republic of Vietnam's army would come across. And so it was actually a strategic point that we needed to hold on to, or at least so I read. I'd love to have your opinion on that.
Yes, it really wasn't looking. It was the mountain itself was overlooking the Ashaw Valley. That's what it was, and it was very close, within about 5 miles of Laos, and so it was real easy for the soldiers to mass in Laos and then come in and man that mountain. And when it came time for us to fight them, uh, uh, they were fully loaded and armed and had maybe 1,000 soldiers up there waiting for us.
All right. So and by the way, Abai, I think, stands for crouching tiger. I think that's what that means.
That could be. I'm not sure. I don't know.
And I think the reason that it gained that name was because there was an incredible amount of jungle forest that provided cover for the Vietnamese troops to come in, that was made it very difficult, one, for us to land helicopters in, and two, for us to be able to know where to strike.
The North Vietnamese to come in. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
All right. So you end up in the 101st. You're sent over to Vietnam.
Up to the right next to the DMZ.
All right. So walk me through from that day to the day you end up going into this battle, what you're doing, what's taking place in your life as part of the military.
Well, I was an infantryman. We called ourselves grunts. I think that was a term they used clear back to World War II. But we were the bottom end. We were the pawns in a chess game. We were expendable. And so we were used to go in and find out where the enemy were at. Now, once we knew where the enemy were at, then the Air Force could come in with their, and the Army with their helicopters and aircraft, fighters, and artillery from all the different little fire bases around the area in the Ashaw Valley could concentrate their fire on the target. And then we would go up and try, no matter what kind of a job the Air Force has done, it always takes boots on the ground to go in and find out what happened and take control of the mountain. And this particular case, it was on May the 10th is when they first attacked. They tried that for 9 days, and they worked their way up and got beat down. Every time they got towards the top, they got beat back to the bottom of the mountain. Well, there were about 5 South Vietnam companies and about 8 or 9 American companies, all 101st Airborne Division, and we were surrounding the mountain.
So my understanding was the 3rd, how does this work? The 3rd Battalion, the 187th Infantry were both known to be in that. Are they part of the 101st? Or was it on that day just the 101st?
Just the 101st.
Okay.
Yes, the 101st Airborne Division. We were the ones that, as a matter of fact, the President of the United States presented our division with the coveted presidential unit citation because of what we did. Mm-hmm. And so it was just us that were there, and the South Vietnamese. And so the troops tried for 9 days to take the mountain, and they got down to where they were only about a third strength because they had so many casualties, whether they be deaths or wounded soldiers, and they needed more strength. And so they decided to bring in two more companies of soldiers from the 101st Airborne, and that included me. And of course, we didn't know. We were just going about our regular daily tasks of patrols, and we were notified, get your gear together, choppers are on the way. And we didn't know where we were going, but we jumped on the choppers and we flew over Hamburger Hill, as it became known later. Dong Ep Bai was the name of the hill on the map. That was the name. And anyway, we landed and took up positions at the base of the mountain, And we were told that we were going to be the point of the spear, so to speak, on the next day, the 10th day, which would be the 20th of May. And at sunup, uh, we started to move our way up the hill, started taking fire. We returned fire. We kept charging, kept charging. The lieutenant who I was with, I was the radio operator for a young lieutenant who was given the task of leading that attack from our company. And so troops were coming up from all sides of the mountain, but we were the lead. And as we went up the mountain, the soldiers tended to, you know, hide in bomb craters and behind trees and stuff and fight, and we couldn't do that. We needed to attack, physically attack. And we went up the mountain, overwhelmed them, and took the mountain on that 10th day. The enemy soldiers that were up on top, they escaped on the back side of the mountain and got away, and they were heading towards Laos, and B-52s came in and dropped their bomb loads. 3 different formations of B-52s came in and dropped their ordnance, and boy, it was like I was a drop of water sitting on a hot frying pan. I was just bouncing around on top of the mountain. Now, because there was so many casualties and so much destruction, one of the guys took a piece of a cardboard that he got from a sea ration box and wrote on there in black uh, uh, pencil. He wrote on there, Hamburger Hill. That's what he named it. And that's where it got its name. That seemed to be a prominent thing the press liked to show, Hamburger Hill. And that became the new name of Hamburger Hill.
By the way, how long then are you actually on the top of that mountain? How long till they pick you up and take you back home? Or back to base anyway?
Well, we were not in the take ground and keep it game. We attacked the mountain. We defeated them. What was left of them retreated back into Laos, and we were up on the top of the mountain by ourselves, but we were needed elsewhere. We stayed on top for 3 days, and while I was on top, I saw a mountain top which was about 3 miles away, and there was a big battle taking place on that mountain one night. The next morning, they picked us up by helicopter, so we were only there 3 days on top once we'd captured it. And they flew us to a little fire base called Firebase Airborne, which is still in the Yasha Valley. Enemy troops North Vietnamese troops had attacked the fire base during the night and overran about 2/3 of the fire base before the sun came up. And of course, the enemy had to retreat then back into the jungle where they were hard to see, hard to find. And that's when we landed, started to rebuild the fire base, get rid of all the bodies that were there, and rebuild our foxholes and bunkers and start all over again on top of Firebase Airborne.
All right. And so and how much longer did this particular battle take?
Well, there were no battles after that point. After we came, the enemy melted back into the jungle, and we saw no more of them. We sent out patrols every day. We're infantry, that's what we do, trying to find them. And once in a while, we'd get engaged in little battles. So one day we were tasked with going to the top of a mountain, but it overlooked our Firebase Airborne, and they picked everybody, all of us up, infantry, and flew us to the base of that mountain, actually to a ridge, and we fought our way up that ridge for 5 days, and we got ambushed about 2 to 3 times a day. And lots of soldiers, if you happen to be the point man or the next 2 or 3 guys behind the line, you usually got killed or wounded. And it was scary when your turn came to be up in the front. One day we got ambushed. We were taking so many casualties. One day a helicopter flew over one of our choppers, one of our Hueys, and the gunner, the machine gunner in the helicopter, took off his breastplate, which was fiberglass, as I remember, a big, thick fiberglass plate that they wore over them, and it was very heavy. So it was impractical for infantry soldiers to be wearing those things. But he knew we were in trouble a lot. So when we flew over, the gunner took off his plate and he threw it down. And the man that was in charge of taking the point that day grabbed that thing and put it on. And so then when it came time to move out, and with him in the lead, we went up there, and suddenly there was a huge explosion. They had a large claymore type mine sitting up in the crotch of a tree, and they blasted, and all that shrapnel came down the trail that we were lined up on. Most of that shrapnel hit this first soldier in the vest, but some of it moved up and it kind of blew away the bottom of his face, blew away his jaw and everything. And I was third or fourth man back, and so I was firing as fast as I could. But as I looked at this soldier up there he was laying on his face, and I could see bullets skipping around where they were still shooting at him. And so this is one of those things where you do something really stupid. Maybe later you'll get a medal, but at the time, that's not what you're thinking. You're just thinking, that's my brother being shot at, and maybe I can help him. So I ran up the trail, grabbed him. Now he weighed 160, 180 pounds. He had a pack on his back that was 70 pounds. He was loaded with ammunition, and he had that chicken plate on that weighed about 50 pounds. And I grabbed him with one hand and lifted him up and ran about 10 yards to a slight depression, threw him down into that depression, and I dove in after him, emptied another 20 rounds up into the jungle where I thought the shooting was coming from. Just then the medic came in. We rolled this soldier over, and remember now, this is my brother, soldierly brother. And I could see that he was missing his whole face from his eyes on down, but his face was bubbling, and he was going to die. He was trying to breathe, but he didn't have a face anymore. And so the medic pulled out his scalpel and asked me if I'd ever done a tracheotomy before. And I said no. And he says, well, neither have I, but we're going to do one right now. So filthy dirty as we were, I hadn't had a bath for maybe 2 to 3 months. I'm filthy dirty, and the medic proceeded to cut a hole here till he could get to his windpipe. And then he cut his windpipe open, and he had me put my little finger down in there and pull the windpipe out so he could breathe. And I could feel his breath going up and down my palm of my hand as I held that windpipe out so he could breathe. Helicopters came, Huey helicopters came, picked him up, took him back to the base, to the hospital, and he died later that afternoon. But we did our best to save him, and that's what happened. Now, we continued to fight, and by the way, we got to the top of the mountain and turned out there was nothing up there. We had just wasted a lot of soldiers trying to see if there was something up there. And so then we went back to the fire base and continued with our patrolling as we had been doing.
So what gets a young kid through that? You're in a position where you're being terrified by the enemy. You're in a place that's not your own home. You have friends of yours who are being harmed and and being killed.
being killed, and not only being killed, but you know, we had made pacts with each other that if we were to get severely wounded, that we would finish each other off. None of us wanted to go through the rest of our lives missing a face, for instance. And so we had made a pact that we were going to just kill, you know, you, I'll kill you, you kill me if I'm messed up. Because it's really a terrible, terrible thing to see the soldiers, the weaponry that the enemy and we used. It was not kind, and it did horrible things. And it was very scary to be an infantry soldier and facing that thing every day. Now, typically, we only found action maybe every couple of weeks, but when it happened, boy, it was ferocious, and we fought back with the best we could, and normally we won the battle. We did every battle I was in, we won. So
what sustains you through that? What is it? Faith? Is it training? Is it just
well,
pretend?
yes, we had a great deal of training before I came to Vietnam. People ask me all the time, how did you manage to escape all those things? Because previously I had been in an ambush where 12 of my soldiers, the 12 of us, were cutting through a field, and this field was surrounded by hedgerows. And once all 12 of us got in the field, the hedgerows just erupted. There were, we estimated 30 enemy soldiers with AK-47s and machine guns, and they cut everybody down except for me. Uh, and that's kind of the story. So it was every time we were engaged with the enemy, it was terrifying.
Okay, wait a minute. I got to go back to this.
Good.
So you're there with 12 other young men. You end up in this firefight.
Yes.
All of them end up being cut down, but you.
Yes.
My question is, what does that do to you? What does that do to your psychology? What does that do to your confidence? What's the effect that actually ends up having on you?
Well, it's a terrifying thing while it's happening. And when it was all over, I had to be assigned to another squad, obviously, and I cried for several weeks. It was just such an emotional thing for me. I had just lost 11 of my brothers. I would never, ever see them again, whether they were so severely wounded they would never come back or whether they were killed. Either way, I'd never see them again. So emotionally, that affected me a lot. Now, people ask me sometimes, how did you make it through there? You know, what did that and several other engagements, major engagements with the enemy, I did very well. I happened to be my reflexes were very good. I was a championship ping pong player when I was young. And so my reflexes were very good, and my vision was 2015. So that's better than 2020. So I could see things that the average soldier could not see. So that was some advantages that I had. And maybe just the luck of the draw was, you know, if you've ever been to a gun range and practiced shooting, maybe, and you hear all those high-powered rifles going off as all these guys try to zero in their weapons, and imagine that you're down range, and instead of a bullseye down there, it's you, and they're all shooting at you with those high-power rifles. That's totally petrifying. And you've got to fight back because they'll just keep shooting until you're all dead. And so you do your best to fight back, and we always overwhelmed them eventually. Our firepower was greater than theirs. Plus, we had helicopters coming in with machine guns and rockets, and they gave us a tremendous amount of advantage to do that. And I was never in a battle that we lost. And as a matter of fact, in Vietnam, we won every major battle that we were in. We Americans won every major battle we were in, and we won most of the smaller battles. But a few times they overwhelmed us, and whoever those soldiers happened to be were either killed or taken prisoner.
So talk to me about faith. Did you have faith before you went in? Did you lose it during those battles? Did it grow during those battles?
I
What
was a
role did faith
religious
play?
person. I still am. And uh, I pleaded for God's help the whole time I was there. Uh, Soldiers who did not consider themselves religious, you get in that environment and they become religious. Whatever it takes to save them, they'll do. And it was not uncommon at all to see soldiers who claimed to be atheists, see them praying, as we're about to go into battle. So, but I was a religious person, and I still am, and I give a lot of credit to God.
Did your faith grow, or did it diminish during that period?
Vietnam was the greatest thing that ever happened to me as far as impacting my life. Okay. I came home and I did not think I was suffering PTSD like so many people who come back. And, you don't have to be in combat to have PTSD. If you see a soldier that's all mangled up and you have to work on him in the hospital, maybe you'll suffer. A mother who loses a child in a car accident can get PTSD. It's just happened. And I was a little older by a year or two than most of the soldiers were. And I had a little more experience and a little more life experience. And I just think that I took it a little better. I was able to handle it a little better. I was in a Costco store, as a matter of fact, doing a book signing one time, and a lady walked up to me, and I had seen her standing back by the coat rack, just watching me, but I didn't act like I knew she was there. And finally, she walked over to me, and she put her arms around me, and she said, "I'm sorry for treating you soldiers the way I did. I didn't know." And soldiers of the Vietnam War, they came home, and many of them suffered a lot because of that, uh, and they suffered PTSD, and plus everybody didn't like them, or not many people didn't like them anyway, just because they were soldiers.
Did you
They
get a
they
bad
most
reception when you came home?
I live and lived then in Utah. Utah was not one of the major hot points of the Vietnam rebellion. Okay, if you lived in California or maybe New York or some of the big cities, there was a it was not nearly as bad in Utah. However, it was still here. And I remember I went to get a photograph taken of me after I came home from Vietnam. I made an appointment with a photographer to come to his shop and get my picture taken in my uniform. And I'd been home about 2 weeks, and I took my uniform off to go to the studio because I didn't want people to know that I was a soldier. I should have been very proud of that moment, to be able to walk around with my medals, and you know people realized that I had fought for my country, but it was not that way. We kind of had to keep a low profile if you wanted to survive the
Yeah, it was an unfair thing that
abuse.
we did to these young boys that we end up sending over there to, uh,
And most of
op-
them did not go by their choice. Most of
right?
them were drafted like I was. I got that letter, as I told you. I went over there, and I did my very best, did my duty, came home with honor as far as I felt. I had done an honorable job. even though I had done some horrible things, that's what war is. And I felt that I had done my very best. And I felt really abused when people, just because I was a soldier, I was a baby killer.
Okay, so you have an interesting perspective on the war, something that you talk about in a lot of your speeches. You argue we did win the Vietnam War. Talk to me about that. Explain that to me.
In 1968, well, it goes before that, I guess. President Kennedy was the very first that got involved with the war. And then LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, was heavily involved. And then was it Nixon after that? And
It
he
was?
became the president. And all three presidents were involved. But it wasn't until LBJ and Nixon that we were really going at it in Vietnam. Lots of troops were going over there. And as a matter of fact, we lost 51,000 killed in Vietnam. And as I told you, between 200 and 400 a week. And that's during the height of the war. And that's terrible. Well, these presidents did the very best they could to send soldiers over there. South Vietnam was a friend of the United States. Uh, but the presidents were afraid that communism was going to, if the North Vietnamese were allowed to win that war and take over South Vietnam, that would be just one more communist. Now, you have to remember during that period of time in the late 60s, I guess through the 50s and the 60s, uh, uh, the Soviet Union was funding heavily rebels in all over the world. There were rebels fighting against their governments in South America, in Central America, in Cuba, in Europe, in Asia. Uh, the whole world, Soviet Union was funding rebel groups, and sometimes those rebel groups won, like they did in Cuba, for instance, and in South America and many other places. The presidents of the United States during that period of time, they did not want this domino effect to happen any more than it already had. And so that's why we were sent over, was to stop that domino effect. Not particularly since we were really great friends with the South Vietnamese. It was because we had to stop that communist domino effect. And as a matter of fact, we did. When the war was over, the general understanding of the population, the politicians, the negative news reports came out that we had lost the war. Uh, but it wasn't until some time later that we started to realize that the communists were not supporting these little rebel groups anymore. And democracy was taking the place in all of these countries that had formerly been communist or leaning towards communist. There was no country after the Vietnam War that decided to adopt the communist way of life. Zero. We stopped them. Now, we didn't know that at the time, but years later, as communism started to fall apart, and the reason they were falling apart is because they ran out of money. They were trying to support all these wars all around the world, and they were taxing their people heavily. And pretty soon, the people revolted. The Soviet Union people revolted, and eventually overturned the government, and that broke them up. And Russia became the last country that existed, and Berlin, or excuse me,
Berlin Wall fell.
the Berlin Wall fell, and that was because they were not getting the support anymore, and the Berlin Wall fell. Not one country since the Vietnam War has turned communist. We stopped communism.
I
Now,
think that's a
people
fair
don't think
argument.
about that now. They still have this in their mind that we lost the war. But if you stop to think about it, we went over there to stop communism,
Yeah, I
not to
think your
fight a war necessarily.
I think your point that is very well taken as far as I'm concerned. We had a real Cold War that constantly threatened to turn into a hot war with Russia. And in fact, at
Yes,
one point in time, it was Russia and China. And the answer to that is that there were a lot of pieces to winning that war. Now, we avoided direct conflict. That was essential because we both had
yes,
nuclear weapons. We utilized diplomacy. We also tried to allow we recognize, or at least we do today, that their economic system was faulty, and that given time it was going to default on its own. We also were able to divide up China and Russia, but these skirmishes that we fought, they played a role in winning that Cold War. We won it.
yes,
We won it without nuclear exchange. We won it with the United States being the only preeminent superpower that was left. And we
yes.
did it not through a process of conquering anybody. We weren't empirical at all. We
We were
simply
not in the
worked.
business. We were not in the business of acquiring countries like
That's right.
communists do. They take a country and they keep it. We fight in a country and then turn it over back to the people and leave.
All right. So
So
I'd like your opinion on something that goes beyond this story in this book. So it seems to me like we're being challenged again today, that there's the beginning of a challenge with China and with Russia, maybe Iran. That's my view anyway. What's your
yes,
view of that? When you look at the world today, would you say that it's not a risk, it's not a challenge, or would your answer be that we should be aware and make sure that we provide a deterrent?
yes, we have got to be a deterrent. We are becoming a little lax as a country, as far, I mean, the people in the country, and maybe some of the politicians. We've even had a avowed socialist run for the president of the United States, and that just scares me to death.
Me and you
Where
both.
people are actually voting for a socialist that wants to turn this country into socialism. Now, socialism isn't the hardline communism, but it's still communism.
Hmm.
And that just scares me to death, the fact that we have people to think that we can actually vote for a person like that, and that's what we should do.
All right, here's another question I'd like to ask you. And again, I don't know your answers on these, but I'm just interested. So I just came back from Israel, and one of the complaints about Israel is that after they were attacked brutally and savagely by Hamas, murdering somewhere around 1,400 people, creating another 2,000 amputees. And by the way, if you look at what they did, it's in my opinion, it's close to a second Holocaust. It's the most horrific thing that I've seen. But the
Yes.
question is, a lot of people are saying, well, Israel should only fight back proportionately. My question in that is, especially to somebody who served, is that the right response? Should we be requiring them only to have a proportional response? Or is when you enter into that type of war, is winning the only thing that matters? And again, I just love your
You
perspective from an infantryman that served on the front.
whether you belong to the United States of America or you belong to Israel, and someone is trying to take your country, you have to stop them, not just appease them. There's that you have to physically stop them, or they'll just keep coming. That's the idea of communism. You just keep coming until they take over your country. Well, Israel right now is trying to stop the Hamas and other groups and end their threat. And I just don't blame them. I know there's some people in the United States that are causing trouble, and I don't like that at all. To have anybody that's on the side of the Hamas, that's just terrible. Uh, we should support Israel and what they're doing, and I don't know whether I'm really excited about sending ground troops over there, but we need to support them in any other way we can. And it seems like they're doing a pretty good job. But anytime you're in a war, lots of people are going to die.
You know, one
Whether
of their
you're a fighter or you're a civilian, that's just what war is.
One of their leaders said to me when I was there something I found to be fascinating. He said, look, we're going to win this war. And if the United States doesn't help us, we'll find guns somewhere else. And if we don't find guns somewhere else, we'll use sticks, because this is existential. We cannot allow Hamas to do to us what they did. One of the things, though, that I think about all the time is this proportional issue. You were talking about the Battle of Hamburger Hill. We didn't fight that proportionally. It sounds to me like we tried to create an overwhelming force against the enemy to make certain that we would win. And it seems to me, if you're that young infantryman standing down on that front, that's exactly what you want.
You cannot just go up, fight them a little bit, and then back off and let them rebuild again. You have to end the threat. If they were attacking America, we would have to end the threat. We don't just back off after winning one battle and back off. Can't do that.
Okay, Rocky. So here's my my last question for you. My last question is: you have spent a lot of time and effort in service to this country, not only in those battlefields, but going back and talking to other troops and trying to build support amongst other military men. Why do you do that? Why do you keep working at this thing?
Okay. I did not write my book with the intention of it being a book of psychological help. I just wanted to tell my story about what infantry soldiers do and what I did. And I've had so many people come up to me, and they have issues still. And this was 55 years ago from when I was there or so. And they still have issues. And so many of them want to know, well, what should I do? And I get emails and people say, I read your book. If Sergeant Rock can make it, so can I. I'm going to go get some professional help. And that's what needs to happen. These soldiers need to go to the VA, talk out their issues, and come to grips with the fact that, that's a long time ago. We did our best. We did what we had to do. It was not your fault. So, and that's what they've got to do. They've just got to get professional help, whether it be, civilian help or the military. I mean, the VA. They've just got to go and get help and not keep having these bad dreams. And I've had several people call me and say, I've gone through 3 marriages, and I'm the guy that's at fault. I know it. I keep having these issues with Vietnam, and my wives couldn't take that, and they left. And after reading your book, I went and got some professional help. I'm married now for the 4th time, and everything is great. And they want to thank me for writing the book. Well, I didn't write that with that intent. However, it's had an effect on people that are having issues, and they think that if Sergeant Rock can make it, he went through a lot worse than most of them did. And if he can make it, maybe I can make it.
Well, Sergeant Rock, with that, I'm going to end it. I want to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, your service to this country.
Can I get a chance to show the book?
Oh, absolutely.
Sergeant Rock, Last Warrior Standing. This is me. I'm 22 years old. I'm actually standing in the field where 1 month before we got ambushed. And you'll read the story and when you get the book.
And how do they get the book, Rock? How would you recommend they do it?
Well, probably the best way to do it now, since I'm no longer signing books, is to go to Amazon.com and get their book section and just order a book. They're about $16 or $17, and sometimes down as low as $15. But that's the best way to get a book if they want to read it. And if you don't know anything about the Vietnam War and you want to understand that better, this is a great way to understand what was going on, because now you know the aftermath of what happened, but you'll now have a chance to find out what it was like when we were actually there.
All right. Sergeant Rock, thank you so much. Godspeed, and we really appreciate all you did. Also, thank your wife for helping us out technologically.
Oh, yeah. She was able to, help me out a lot. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate the time to tell my brothers out there, that are having issues. Hang in there, brother. You can overcome this.
All right, Rock. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned, and we can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.